So what a week in politics. We saw House Speaker Greg Fergus survive yet another attempt to force him out of the chair this week. The Liberals and the NDP provided enough votes to defeat a Conservative motion calling for his removal. We also learned about a correction that was quietly issued back in April on that widely cited PBO report on the carbon tax, a mistake that Liberal MP Ryan Turnbull says led to Canadians having an overestimated sense of how much carbon pricing cost them. Then, just as this show was going to air yesterday, a historic verdict that made Donald Trump the first U.S. president to be convicted of a crime. We're going to talk to our party insiders about all of that. Craig McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer, Melanie Richer, former Director of Communications for the NDP, and Fred Delory is a former National Campaign Director for the Conservative Party. Okay, we got to just start with Trump. Fred, I want to start with you. I mean, he has defied the laws of political gravity. Looked like he might defy the laws of legal gravity, but it kind of came crashing down yesterday. What are your thoughts on what we saw?
It's fascinating. He's made a career of defying the laws of legal gravity, and it came crashing down yesterday. One of the things that jumps out at this whole issue to me is the politicization of the U.S. system. And I'm not a Trump guy. I wouldn't vote for him. I hope he loses in the fall. But the U.S. political or judicial system has become so politicized, where all the prosecutors against him, against all the charges he has across the board in all the various states, are all Democrats. And you could say, maybe it's them that's going after, but also there's no charges being laid anywhere by Republican prosecutors. And the fact that I'm saying Republican and Democrat prosecutors, because they're elected to these positions, they run on campaigns to be elected. And some of these prosecutors have run on prosecuting Trump. So I think it's problematic, the U.S. system, and I'm very grateful that we live in a country where we have a judicial system that is free of politics. We will criticize different things that we see. It's the laws we criticize. It's the decisions politicians make that we criticize. Bail reform and things like that. But the U.S. system, and the thing is right now, Trump is going to appeal this, and he may lose a number of appeals, but he can go, I believe, all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and that right now is a majority Republican court. So that could be overturned at that level. And it's the politicization of it that I think is so terrible and dangerous. And I worry about what's going on down there. And we could see Republican prosecutors now starting to target Democrats now that this has been opened up.
Well, that was certainly the call from some Republican congressmen in particular, Mel. I mean, it was a jury, though, that convicted him. And it was overwhelmingly, including the guy, juror number 2, as he's known, who got all of his news from Truth Social and still convicted Donald Trump. But, Fred's right. Like, politics is just so infested every aspect of the American kind of system that it makes it rife for these kind of claims.
And the rhetoric is so heated and so divisive that it is hard to your point, to see how, well, then you don't just start seeing it on both sides. And then what is the country if you can't trust your judicial thank you, system
legal
to be your legal I'll go with that one. Your legal, it's the French, the legal system to be fair, right, and to be bias free. That evidently is not always the case in the States. Now, some would say that Donald Trump committed a crime and he's been convicted of this crime by a jury of his peers, and that should be that. But I don't think in the mood that we've seen in the States for the last few years that's going to just stay there, right? Like, we're still seeing the rhetoric even from the last election of how people are still saying that election was stolen. So the faith that we have in our institutions and the importance of that faith in the institutions, I think by way of, to your point, the politicization, I'm not saying any English words properly tonight, of the judicial system leaves people feeling like, well, can they trust that this decision was sound, even if it was by a jury of his peers?
I struggle with politicization as well. It's a banned word in my teleprompter. Greg, just what are your thoughts on this? I mean, all of the attacks on institutions and experts and the integrity of processes is sort of like a lamentable feature in Western politics right now, and Trump always is at the center of the narrative on that.
Yeah, when we, in high school, we learn about the U.S. system and the three, pillars of it, and he seems to be damn determined to tear them all down. I mean, the other, story that's been around about the judicial system in the United States is the Supreme Court, where you have, some really concerning behavior by two justices, and wow, they blame their wives, which is, again, you want to check your watch and find out what year it is. But I think it is very, very, frightening in terms of, the reaction. I mean, I saw some of the U.S. commentators this morning talk about how they were worried about the jurors, that people might find out who they were. Mm-hmm. I think it is important to point out that at the beginning, the judge did say, if you have a huge issue with, with Donald Trump, speak now. And, they were able to put their hand up and just clear them right out of the way. So I think that was, the system kind of adapted to that. I note what your first guest, Chamberlain, Charles Chamberlain was talking about, and he's talking about that middle in terms of the impact on the election. And I know the other day after Nikki Haley said that she, despite everything she said about Donald Trump, she would still vote for him. Yes. The Biden administration moved on that very quickly and started doing outreach to the Haley voters because they might not necessarily be Trump voters.
Okay, so Mel, we have a situation in the most powerful country with the largest army and biggest economy on the face of the earth, where the Republican nominee and someone with at least a 50-50 chance of becoming president is a convicted felon. And here in Canada, we're trying to get Greg Fergus fired on the weekly. I mean, when you look at the stakes and the odds, the contrast is quite something. But he keeps finding himself at the center of problems through various reasons. Another finding against him this week in terms of a breach of privilege. But you kind of don't think any of this matters. I mean, what's your thoughts on that issue? Yeah,
not necessarily that it doesn't matter. Obviously, the way that the House of Commons works is important, but I don't think that this matters in a real way to people's lives. I found it interesting. We talked about this a little bit last week, but I found it interesting that while and maybe a little bit of an explanation is important, but opposition day motions are rare. This is when the opposition gets to decide what the debate is of the day and gets to force the government on an issue that they want the government to pronounce themselves on. And while the NDP focused on pharmacare to see who was going to be supporting pharmacare, we saw the Conservatives put a motion forward to replace the speaker, to remove the speaker. And for folks at home who are either struggling to pay the bills, who are either, feeling squeezed by their mortgage payments, I don't know that if I'm in that situation, that's what I want the Conservative Party to be focused on. And then, as we see with these kinds of situations, glass houses, and when you criticize people for doing some of the things that you've also maybe accidentally also, innocently been caught in, well, then it kind of reveres itself on you. And when that's your only attack, or when that's the only thing that you're talking about, well, then what are you left talking about? And we saw that this week when the Conservative Deputy Speaker, Chris D'Entremont, was also accidentally, he says, put on campaign material for a Conservative candidate. And, this may all be super innocent for all involved, but the point still is if that's the only thing that you're talking about, well, then what are you telling people afterwards?
So Fred, about that, because what happened with D'Entremont was he's in his robes. I think it's for an event in his riding or another person's riding, but he's in his speaker's robes, and it is a partisan event. He says it was an innocent thing, like Fergus says it was an innocent thing, but where does this go, right? Because everyone's going to find these little things about each other, and then it becomes a kind of a race to the bottom.
Right. It's funny, you started the conversation on this topic about how the U.S. is dealing with their issues, and I remember they were seized with speaker issues for a very long time in the U.S. Congress.
That's a very different speaker.
Absolutely, but it's funny that we're seeing a parallel here where we're, I wouldn't say we're seized by it, but we do try to clearly bring it up a lot. The issue with Speaker Fergus, within the Conservative viewpoint, is that he's a very partisan speaker. They've raised issues with this, and there was he did a video for a partisan Liberal event, and then the recent ad that they put out was very harsh language towards the Leader of the Opposition.
Which the party says they auto-populated on the webpage.
Which the Liberal Party of Canada did. What happened with D'Entremont appears to be a volunteer in the neighbouring riding grabbed his House of Commons photo and put it on a flyer. And there's no language, there was nothing harsh. So to compare it, I don't think it's a fair comparison. But to Melanie's point about the Liberals, the Conservatives focusing on other issues that may not be bread and butter issues that are heart and mind of Canadians, I think what they're trying to do is just show chaos. They're trying to cause problems, slow down the House. We're at that stage where the House only sits for a few more weeks. And a day was lost because of this type of motion.
So, Greg, my question was going to be: do you think the Conservatives are doing this just to sow chaos and Fred brought it up? I mean, that does seem to be the play here, more as much as anything else.
It does. I kind of chuckled at what Fred was saying because, okay, let's just take the names out of here. You've got two individuals that have a job with Parliament that they're supposed to be nonpartisan. They've been used in partisan advertising, and both have said that it wasn't them, and it seems quite true that it was beyond their control. Why is it different?
The difference, I guess, would be the finding of a breach by Chris D'Entremont, of all people, on Greg Fergus. So
you're helping me out here.
Yeah,
Dave.
I know what you're saying. So
So I think if people are going to look at this at face value, it does seem it's different than when the other guy does it, which is really, really silly. And in terms of changing the agenda of the House, it hurt the Conservatives. They had a motion that they wanted to get going. I find this, what I worry about is that the Conservatives are going to keep this up to eventually, I think what they want is, even if Fergus hasn't done anything, he's such a lightning rod. This bit about him being very partisan, and it's coming from people like Michelle Rempel-Garner and Andrew Scheer. Well, they're partisan too. If I all of a sudden made an accusation on the show that they're partisan, everyone laughed. Of course they are. And Greg Fergus was partisan before. He was a Liberal member of Parliament. John Fraser is a former Speaker of the House who passed away recently. If you look at the flag at Parliament right now, it's at half staff. He was a political minister in the Mulroney government before he was a Speaker. Peter Milliken, everybody keeps forgetting, he was one of the biggest hecklers in the House. So this bit about that we expect somebody who is in politics to be partisan just seems a bit silly.
Okay, I got about 4.5 minutes left, and I want to get to your topic because you want to talk about the Parliamentary Budget Officer, which is a frequent topic of conversation in the House, and he was a frequent topic of conversation this week. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so basically the Parliamentary Budget Office revealed that their math was wrong, and they revealed this on April 17th, but they never said anything to anyone. If you go to that website right now, you will have to scroll backwards to find that, and it was not brought forward. I was prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt about a mistake until his interview with you, where it just seemed to be very defensive and not dwelling in reality. He also did one with the Toronto Star, where his excuse for not making a big deal about this was the budget was out at the same time, and it might have been lost in the shuffle. Well, it's one of those cases where, we decided to do nothing, so that was the right choice. I think he had the ability to perhaps save this, but the way that they are downplaying this is really unfortunate. And the fact that they're saying that they're going to, it's not, he claims that it won't change very much, but they're not going to change it to the fall. Well, if it's not going to change it to the fall, then why are you doing it right now? Yeah. I think, along with your power plan of the other day, he has to resign. That is the office that is going to check the math on the platforms. There is no way any party wants, they're going to say, if they don't like his math, they're going to point to this, whether you're Conservative, Liberal, or New Democrat. This is bad.
Yeah, he said it wouldn't change his findings much, Mel, but it was too complicated to do it quickly. So that is an issue there. But this, I don't know, what do you make of this PBO
Yeah, well, I'll go back to, earlier we were talking about the importance of our institutions and the trust in our institutions. And I think a lot of people and, all parties place a lot of trust in the PBO. And the fact that you either
Fred is shaking his head about trusting the PBO, just
hey,
so you
man,
know.
He said some comments, or that office said some comments about our platforms too. But anyways, the fact that you thought not saying anything on a topic that is so divisive in this country right now is just, to me, I don't understand that. I don't understand how that's an innocent mistake. The saying, getting lost in the shuffle, perfect. You made a mistake. It's going to get lost in the shuffle. Even better. I don't understand the reasoning, and I don't understand the reasoning for doubling down or the reasoning for holding it. If this was a mistake, get it out, fix it so that people can trust that what you're doing is above board.
Yeah, and the mistake, Fred, was including the industrial pricing costs in the economic effect of the consumer pricing costs, which he says will not have a big impact. I've seen some analysis done by my colleague Robson Fletcher, where he talks to Trevor Toome and says, boy, this could actually move the numbers quite a bit because it's the big emitters that are paying. I mean, what do you make of this whole thing? Because this has been weaponized by the Conservatives quite effectively, and now we find out it has some mistakes.
Right. I want to go and bring up U.S. politics for the third time.
Okay.
This department was created based on the U.S. Congressional Budget Office. It was created about 15 years ago as an idea that my government thought would be good to put in place. And it's been a total disaster since. I think it is pointless. I think all it does is it's a tool for the opposition to hammer the government. When we created it in the Harper government, it became one of the biggest opposition to the Harper government. And I think we have a parliamentary system that works, and it's another Americanization of it that I think has corrupted the system, and it's brought another player into it. So it's the whole office, I think, it doesn't have a purpose. We have MPs that could do estimates at the committees. They see the budget. They go through this stuff. They can do this work themselves. To have this basically a partisan entity now exist, I think is a bad mark on us.
Greg, I was really surprised as we were discussing this on Wednesday, as you referenced, and the panel just went to resignation right away.
Yeah,
I was surprised to see that, but you're also there, right?
Yeah, and as a political geek, that was pretty gripping television. I mean, I tried to do some media measurement of this, media impressions of this report and its impact, and it's really tough to measure because it's in everything. I was finding columns in the Winnipeg Free Press. Axe the Tax is based on this. This is a false foundation, and he doesn't seem to be taking it very seriously what he wrought here.
Yeah, Axe the Tax probably exists with or without this, but the math fueling it definitely relies on this report.